Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the very first episode of the True Crime All the Time podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ferguson. So very excited to finally get out this first episode. This podcast has been a long time in the making. When I first started down this path, I really had no idea how much work was involved in starting a podcast. But when I made the decision that I wanted to do a podcast, there was really only one subject, and that was true crime. I've been fascinated with true crime, murders, serial killers for as long as I can remember.
In 2016, California wife and mother Sherry Papini disappeared for 22 days. When she was found, she told authorities a detailed account of being kidnapped and tortured. Years later, in a stunning twist, Papini pled guilty to making false statements about what happened to her, setting off a media firestorm. Now, for the first time, Sherry Papini is telling her side of the story and revealing shocking new information. Sherry Papini, Caught in a Lie, an ID documentary event, Monday, May 26th at 9 on ID. Set your DVR.
Please remember to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to make sure that you get each new episode. Rate, review, leave comments about the show. Also, you can visit the podcast website at www.truecrimeallthetime.com. And while you're there, please click through our Amazon banner for all of your Amazon shopping. One thing I want to say up front is that this podcast is not meant for young ears, so parental guidance is advised. The subject matter that the podcast covers is of a violent nature. We're talking about some of the most disturbed individuals and violent cases in the history of crime. So at this time, I'd like to introduce my guest host for this episode, Mike Gibson. Mike is a colleague who also has an interest in true crime. Since we're both Mikes, I'll call him Gibby, just so no one gets confused. So Gibby, what's going on?
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
I'm good, man. I'm just, like I said, I'm super excited. I think you in particular know how long I've been waiting to get this episode and podcast started.
Yeah, this is a big, always been a big passion of yours. So
yeah, definitely.
I'm excited for you to finally bring this, forward.
Yeah. So how was your Thanksgiving?
It was good. Always busy because I know you're a true crime and you love all that stuff. So my gift to you for Thanksgiving is I have a little Thanksgiving true crime for you. On, I think it was November 26, 2009 in South Florida. You're like this, Mike. There was a guy named Paul I think his name was Merhiggy, and he had Thanksgiving meal with 16 family members and friends. And they were just sitting around the table conversing and joking. And after dinner, he decided to whip out a handgun. He executed 4 relatives, including his cousin-in-law, his twin sister, one who was pregnant, and also his cousin, which was 6 years old. And afterward, he reportedly said that he's been waiting 20 years to do this. He fled the scene, but they caught him, and eventually they cut a plea deal, and he got 7 consecutive life sentences. So,
holy shit!
So a lot of people have some stress during Thanksgiving. Coming back to see the family and all that. So this is an extreme version of Thanksgiving gone wrong.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've heard of that. Or if I did, I don't remember. So a couple of things, right? 16 people. That's a big ass Thanksgiving dinner, first of all.
Right. There's a lot of turkey.
And then, what's going on with this guy that he's been waiting 20 years to plan and execute these people.
Right. Exactly.
That's crazy. I'll have to look it up
I have to look at that family dynamic there. What went wrong so early in his life that he felt he needed to do that. But I'm guessing that's for a later podcast of yours.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that on a later one. But so to stay on that subject for a while, killing 16 people, that's a big deal. Waiting 20 years to kill 16 people, I think I'm almost more shocked at that. Yeah.
That's just what a bizarre thing to say, right?
Right. I mean,
waiting 20 years to execute the folks that he did, family members at that, young ones in the mix as well. So the hatred he must have had.
Well, so a lot of those people weren't even alive when 20 years before that. So
exactly.
Yeah.
But it
I'm
just
sure
shows you that his mental state, how he was mentally. Sit there and laugh and joke. And actually, the article even talks about how they did some, sung some sing-alongs together
before
during the evening. Before,
right.
What a messed up guy.
Yeah, well, I talked in my introduction episode about the mental aspect, and I think for sure that's one of the main things that just really gets me about some of these people, how they can do what they do, what drives them to do what they do. You and I have known each other for a while, and I just can't imagine knowing anyone that has that kind of thoughts or wiring or what. We're going to get into it. I mean, that's what this podcast is going to be about, I guess. People that are, do the types of things that you and I and most people that are listening to this podcast, I mean, they just they couldn't dream of doing.
No, yeah. I mean, you just, never suspect certain people would do what they do. So Interesting.
Yeah, no, it's a good story. You ready to get into this first episode?
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it. So the topic or the case that we're going to be talking about tonight, I've chosen a man and woman serial killer duo, Alton Coleman and Debra Brown.
Modern day Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah. I mean, they really were. I mean, and you and I had talked about this. We've been researching this for a little while. We knew we were going to do this one. One of the main reasons why I suggested it is because of the ties to our hometown of Dayton, Ohio. I can remember, I mean, maybe being 10 or 11 years old, and this was big time news in Dayton, Ohio. And I don't know why I can remember that. I'm not saying it jump started my fascination with true crime. It could have, I don't know, but I definitely remember it.
Yeah, and I do too. And I think, you got to go back to that time frame. You didn't have all the media channels and, the social media and all the internet. So, I mean, you had basically 3 TV channels of news. So when the big news broke, you typically got to hear it, and there wasn't another channel that the kids were on to protect them from that type of story. So
you mean no SpongeBob?
No SpongeBob back then.
No SpongeBob back then.
No SpongeBob. No.
So
Captain Kangaroo.
Yeah, there was Captain Kangaroo. Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Rogers, yeah.
So, just to kind of set the scene a little bit, this was a deadly pair. They went on a killing spree that spanned 6 states and included 8 murders, 7 rapes, 3 kidnappings. So, I mean, this was a bad duo for sure. And I think not that all of that's not crazy, but, one of the crazy things about this is all of this occurred in just a small 2-month period of time. So, I think that adds something, to it.
Absolutely.
The other thing that I really found fascinating about this is that both Alton Coleman and Debra Brown were African American. Debra Brown, obviously, an African American female. Those 2 facts in itself, I think, help make this case stand out. I mean, it's well known, everybody listening that's into true crime knows that the majority of serial killers, they're white males. I mean, it's just a known fact. You've got, a small number of famous women. You've got the Eileen Wuornos and, you've got some others. But I think this combination, African-American male and African-American female, really stands out in the annals of true crime. I'm not sure if I've seen this before. So yeah, I wanted to point that out, that I do think it helps it stand out. So, well, let's start out talking about their childhood. I think most people would agree that when you're looking at serial killers, you're really going back to childhood to see some of the triggers and some of the things that may have caused them to ultimately, end up doing what they do. So Alton Coleman is born on November 6, 1955 in Waukegan, Illinois. His mother worked 3 jobs, and at some point, and Mike, I think you know a little bit more about this maybe, but I know at some point he lived with his 73-year-old grandmother in Waukegan.
Right. So here's what I find interesting is that I think his thought processes were molded at an early age because his mom, Mary Bates, and he never knew who his father was, right? His mom was a drug user, a gambler, a prostitute. But you got to go back a little bit and look at this and remember that Mary Bates, she was at 14 pregnant with her first child. She was sent off to a state girls' school, and then shortly thereafter, she was sent. Eventually, she ended up at a psych hospital because she was found guilty of infecting a man with syphilis on purpose. And then it was around 1950 that she left her first child behind and moved 2-3 states out to Oklahoma and had 2 more children with her first husband. Decided 4 years later to leave those kids behind and came back to Waukegan, where she lived in they call it the Market Street area. And it's kind of like a blue collar, predominantly, black city of Lake Michigan between the Chicago and Milwaukee area. And she lived in that they call it the 5-block residential area. Back in that day, it was just a bunch of wooden shacks around the railroad tracks where a lot of the garbage dumps were and junkyards happened to be. And that was the neighborhood that Alton Coleman was born into.
So not to cut you off, but was it that point where she moved out to Oklahoma? Is that why he's living with his 73-year-old grandmother?
No, this was before. So she comes back after being with her husband. She comes back and, through her prostitution, she gets pregnant with Alton, has Alton, throws Alton in the trash can, and her mom makes her take Alton out of the trash can. And at that point, her mom, Alma, she kind of takes over raising Alton on and off because, Mary, she's living in a kind of like a prostitution house. And, Alton, there he is, around that day in, day out, seeing the drug activity, seeing sex acts happening right in front of him. To the point, Mike, and I don't want to jump ahead on you here, but I found it interesting that during that time that he was staying at the prostitution house, he actually stole one of the John's watch and I believe wallet at the age of 5. And at that point, it was the first time he was arrested for theft at the age of 5.
So basically what you're saying is Alton Coleman was foobarred from the get-go.
Absolutely. Even his grandma would call him some vulgar nicknames because this is a kid that, clearly from the way he was raised, he had anxiety. So he soiled himself nightly. And so his grandma, when he was out with the kids in the neighborhood would talk about how he wets his pants all the time. And she had a nickname for him. And I guess he did this all the way up until the age of 12 or 13. So the kids teased him. The grandma teased him. Everybody that was close to him teased him. So, I think this also sets that mindset that he ends up, that wiring in his head.
Right.
Not to mention that even his grandma, both his mom and his grandma both abused him, whipped him, with extension cords. So I think all this builds into how his mental status comes about.
Yeah. Well, obviously no excuse for what he ends up doing, and we'll get into the crimes and stuff like that. But, it does speak to upbringing what you're exposed to at a young age. And it does seem like a lot of these people that go on to commit these heinous crimes, they have similar backgrounds, whether it's neglect or being beaten, often. It's just things like that. Now, on the flip side, let's point out, I'm sure there was a lot of other people in that neighborhood that probably had maybe not quite as bad, but pretty similar upbringings, and they didn't go out and kill 8 people and rape,
Yeah, I agree with you. It's just interesting.
It is.
I think about it and think about, at 11 years old, he was gambling in the streets, according to his brother Donnie, right? He's out there gambling in the alleys, winning the money to buy his drugs and his alcohol at 11.
Oh, so you weren't doing that? I mean,
I wasn't. Yeah, maybe you. I don't know.
That's how I had to. That's how I had to earn my money at 11. But
well, you're from a different neighborhood than I am.
Yeah.
So
All right. So I mean, we're giving a little background into his psyche and upbringing. So Coleman drops out of school in middle school. Normally not a good sign, right?
No.
He's well known to the Illinois law enforcement community. He was charged with sex crimes 6 different times between 1973 and 1983. 2 of the cases were dismissed, with Coleman pleading guilty to lesser charges. So obviously the guy is, he has a sex problem. He's a sexual criminal for sure at this point in time. And a couple of those he was acquitted of, but that brings us to another part of his childhood. And I'm not sure when he was diagnosed with some of these things. I don't know. Probably not as a kid. It could have even been later on after he was in the penal system. But I mean, I just want to read off some of these things that I read that Coleman was diagnosed with. So, personality disorder, antisocial, narcissistic, and obsessive features, with additional diagnoses including epileptic spasms, that's easy for you to say, psychosis, and borderline personality disorder. That sounds like a lot to me.
That's a whole lot, but yet the courts decided to parole him in 1976, right? So, and I'm sure that they probably discovered some of this during the 2 years he was in prison, through their own studies of him while he was in there. But for whatever reason, I mean, in 1976, he's paroled. Somehow, Mike, in 1980, he was able to hold, 2 jobs, the only jobs he ever had in his life. But it was a very short period of time. And, from what you just said, it's kind of scary that in one job, he was a nurse's aide for 2 months. And on another job, he was the recreation supervisor at the VA hospital in North Chicago. 2 places you would think somebody with those issues listed probably shouldn't have been. But,
it was the 70s, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
that's all you can say.
Right.
So, again, he's been in jail for sex crimes. Not to jump ahead to talking about his future crimes, but he was scheduled to go on trial for the rape of a 14-year-old girl at the time that he flees and begins this killing spree that we're gonna talk about. So,
True Crime All the Time is sponsored by BetterHelp. Folks, therapy can feel like a big investment, but let's think about the state of your mind. It's just as important as your physical health. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, which adds up really fast. But with BetterHelp Online Therapy, you can save, on average, up to 50% per session. With BetterHelp, you pay a flat fee for weekly sessions, saving you big on cost and time. And you get quality care at a price that makes sense and can help you with anything from anxiety to everyday stress. Your mental health is worth it, and now it's within reach. I've used the BetterHelp service for years. And I love the fact that, I can connect with a therapist in a comfortable spot in my home on my laptop. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. Your well-being is worth it. Visit betterhelp.com/TCAT today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/TCATT. Even the smallest step forward can make a big difference in your financial future. When you open a Chime checking account, you're one step closer to a better financial future with no maintenance fees, fee-free overdraft up to $200, or getting paid up to 2 days early with direct deposit. Making progress has never been easier. I think we've all been in that position where we've had an overdraft. Well, with Chime, you can overdraft up to $200 with no fees. That's amazing. And they have over 50,000 fee-free ATMs. Make progress towards a better financial future with Chime. Open your account in 2 minutes at chime.com/TCAT. That's chime.com/TCATT. Chime feels like progress. Banking services and debit card provided by the Bancorp Bank N.A. or Stride Bank N.A., members FDIC. Spot me eligibility requirements and overdraft limits apply. Fees apply at out-of-network ATMs. MyPay eligibility requirements apply. Credit limits range from $20 to $500. $2 fee applies to get funds instantly. Crime checking account required. Go to chime.com/disclosures for details.
So let's talk about Debra Brown for a little bit. Debra Brown she's still alive, but one of 11 children, listed as borderline intellectually disabled, suffered head trauma as a child, which, there again, if you read about a lot of serial killers, read about a lot of true crime, head trauma as a child, Gacy had it. I mean, you can just tick off the number of big time serial killers that were purported to have suffered head trauma as a child. It's a big factor. It appears to be a big factor.
So are you? I mean, what are they saying here, Mike? Are they saying that even though she was, I can't remember how old she was she 21 or something like that? But at that age, are they saying even though she was 21, her mental status was what? A 10-year-old, a 12-year-old?
Yeah, what I read, it didn't say. So I guess you could, exactly what intellectually disabled is. I don't know. I think it's fair to say that she probably had a fairly low IQ. She was also diagnosed with, some different types of personality disorders. So, both of them together had that. But what's interesting about Brown, I mentioned the head trauma being an indicator of future bad behavior, but Debra Brown isn't the one that instigated, this killing spree. We're going to talk about it as we get into it. She went along and actually participated in some of it, but on her own, I don't think she would have gone out and been a lone serial killer or committed the heinous acts that ended up happening had it not been for Alton Coleman. So
yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
No way to say for sure, but I mean, that's my guess on it. So Brown was engaged to a man at the time that she met Coleman, and this was in 1983. And she ends up leaving her family and moving in with Coleman not that long after meeting him, it appears. We talked about her probably not instigating this whole killing spree on her own, but it clearly says that she was a willing participant. But the thing that I found interesting is in all the reading, it stated that, Brown basically had no history of violence. She had no record, any indication that she'd had trouble with the law until she met Alton Coleman. That kind of goes back to me thinking that he's the catalyst for this whole thing, and her having a low IQ probably didn't help in the fact that she was either duped or coerced or talked into going along with his plans. Well, what do you think? Should we get into talking about some of the crimes?
I think we should.
All right. Well, I've got a quick sound bite that I'm going to play, and then we'll get into the timeline.
The pattern seems to be that while Coleman, accompanied by Brown, perpetrates acts of violence against almost anyone he comes in contact with.
Coleman seems to have a special way of luring children into his death trap.
With candy or frankfurters or some similar inducement which would appeal to very young children.
He will go into neighborhoods in order to get whatever items he needs for survival. This is independent of his effort to obtain young black girls for his deviant purposes.
Coleman is thought to be traveling with Debra Brown, a former lover. But whether she is a willing accomplice or a captive is not clear.
It is a master-slave type relationship. She's been described as being willing to do anything that Alton Coleman tells her to do.
So there, you hear that sound bite. A couple of interesting things that jump out at me. The last part there, I think, where the detective is saying that they believe it to definitely be a master-slave relationship, in his words, master-slave, where their understanding is that, Debra Brown's willing to do whatever Alton Coleman wants her to do, without question. The other thing, and again, we'll make light of things sometimes, even talking about these terrible crimes, but you hear this police officer or police commissioner or whoever it is, I don't know his name, but he's talking about how Alton Coleman is luring these victims, and he says candy, and then he says frankfurters. And I'm thinking, so candy, we were all told, don't take candy from strangers. Nobody ever said don't take frankfurters from strangers.
Yeah, what's that about? That must be a Chicago kind of a thing.
Yeah, it was definitely, like I said, I don't know who it was, but I'm sure it was up Illinois, or it could have even been in Wisconsin.
We all would have ran if somebody wanted us to come up and grab a frankfurter
Yeah.
from somebody. Yeah.
I don't know what kid is lured by a frankfurter, but they had some. Unless he was just talking out of his ass, he had some knowledge that was a tactic.
Yeah. Well, they did have, at least from what I recall, they had one surviving. I'm sure you're going to cover that, but I know there was one surviving kid.
You're talking about Annie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll definitely get to Annie pretty quickly into the crimes. But did you read somewhere where Annie said she was given a frankfurter?
No. But yeah, I'm guessing that maybe that's where the detective got it from. I don't know where else he got it from, since most of the other victims, didn't survive. So,
well, hopefully there's no kids listening to this podcast, but I guess parents, you're going to have to update your vernacular to add, don't take candy from strangers, don't take frankfurters from strangers either, because apparently that's a thing.
No more frankfurters.
No more. Not going to do it. So we begin May 29th. The killing spree begins with the murder of 9-year-old Vernita Wheat, who Coleman kidnaps from Wisconsin, and he brings to Illinois after befriending Vernita's mother. Some of the stuff that I read, and Mike, I know you have a lot too. Juanita, who is Vernita's mother, apparently allowed Vernita to accompany Coleman to his apartment to pick up a stereo system, and they never returned. There was a customer at a local club that ultimately testified that a black male, who I think he identified as Alton Coleman, and Vernita, who, keep in mind, is 9 years old, right?
Yeah, that just makes me sick to my stomach.
Oh, it does.
Mike.
It does. I mean, some of this shit that we're gonna be talking about is I mean, it's nasty when you really think about it.
Yeah,
But so they enter a club at approximately 11:30 at night. What kind of 9-year-old is allowed to enter a club? I mean, again, we're talking, this is early 80s now, right? This is 84, but still, I don't get that at all. I guess the man uses the telephone, and then a few minutes later, a cab arrives to pick them both up. So on June 19th, so that's, that's what, approximately 2-3 weeks almost after that, the body of Vernita Wheat was discovered in the bathroom of an abandoned building in Waukegan, Illinois. She had been raped and strangled. As we go through these crimes, we're going to be saying that a lot. This is the heinous part of Alton Coleman. Number one, his victim of choice was young African-American females. And when I say young, I mean very young. And number two, he was a sexual deviant, so he raped and normally strangled.
And this is Vanita. Here she is in this abandoned building. And then you find out that it was actually only like 4 blocks from Coleman's grandma's apartment where he used to stay. So I mean, here he is. He's not only is he attacking young innocent children, he's doing it right now. He's doing it in his own backyard, right? I mean, he's so careless that he's okay just stepping out of his own backyard and finding these victims.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary. On June 18th, then we get into Tamika Turks. So Tamika Turks is 7 years old. She is being accompanied by her 9-year-old aunt, Annie, and they are abducted in Gary, Indiana. Both girls are sexually assaulted by both Alton and Debra Brown. Tamika is strangled to death. Annie's left for dead, but somehow manages to survive. And then the very next day, on June 19th, Tamika's body is found. And that it just happens to be the same exact day that Vernita Wheat's body was found. So again, we said this in the beginning, all of this takes place in a very, very short amount of time. You're going to see that June 19th was a very busy day. They just had discovered 2 bodies already. Go ahead. I know you want to talk about Annie here in a minute.
I do. So I'll let you finish your point, but then I wanted just to just quickly give you an interesting story about Annie.
Yeah. So when I mentioned June 19th. Also on June 19th, and I'm going to circle back around to Mika and Annie, but on June 19th, the couple is believed to have abducted Donna Williams, who was 25. Her body was discovered on July 11th. So she too had been strangled and raped. I don't know if they ultimately proved that it was Coleman and Brown, but I just found that very strange that you've got that one day. A lot happened on that one day. But I want to go back to Mika and Annie for a little bit before you tell some of the interesting facts that you uncovered. And this is going to be hard for some people to hear, but I think it's necessary to convey the gravity of what happened. Apparently, and like I said, Brown was definitely involved. So Tamika was crying, Brown was holding her nose and mouth, and Coleman is stomping on her chest. Again, we're talking about a 7-year-old girl. Couldn't be any more innocent. They carry Tamika a short distance away. Annie's forced to perform some sex acts on both Brown and Coleman. Coleman rapes her. Brown and Coleman together choke her until she's unconscious. So again, we already said Annie lives. When she wakes up, both Coleman and Brown are gone, and Tamika is found dead in the bushes very close to where Annie wakes up. So Tamika is strangled with an elastic strip of a bed sheet. Later on, it will be found out this same exact fabric was found in the apartment that Coleman and Brown shared together. But I know you're getting ready to talk about Annie, so I have to say this. And this was probably I almost got a little sick to my stomach when I saw this one. But, they cut Annie so bad, so deep that her intestines were protruding into her vagina. I mean, they decimated this girl, and somehow she survived.
It's just sickening, man.
It is sickening.
It's just sickening. And the fact that she survived is amazing. But, as we find out later in life, that trauma, what that did to her, it messed the rest of her life up. She was never given the opportunity to be like most young girls. She never was given the opportunity to be, a young lady. She had it bad after that. And, so the interesting part of this is that, it was around 2012, she and her two sons, Kenneth Coleman, no relation, obviously, and Ronte Terrell, and of course Annie. At that time, she was 38. They attempted murder and robbery and carjacking up in that same area. So here she is. She's had all this terrible trauma happen to her, sets her life on a bad course thereafter. And, now she is serving prison time because of, I think, what happened to her in her childhood set her on a bad course. I can only think that had to be the reason for her to go down this path. So
yeah, I mean, when you told me, I didn't find that in my research, and when you told me about that, I was amazed. But I think it goes full circle back to what we talked about as far as childhood, upbringing, those formative years make you who you ultimately are going to be. If she never encounters Alton Coleman and Debra Brown, is not, brutally raped by them and cut up and left for dead, is her life completely different?
Yeah.
You would have to think probably yes.
I would think so. And it just shows you, I mean, this attempted murder, robbery, carjacking, this all took place. Her one son shot her boyfriend. The other son used a baseball bat, and she also contributed. And it was over something so minor as who used the last of the salad dressing.
So that's crazy that would all happen over just a little bit of salad dressing. But I think it, in some form or fashion, has to go back to, what happened to her in her childhood. It would be crazy to think that didn't play a factor in it somehow.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, her mental, status, if that's the right word. She grew up in the same neighborhood. It's a rough neighborhood. Here she is, 9 years old. She's got this, terrible scar. Everybody knows that she was sexually assaulted. And you know how, growing up, kids are brutal, probably not showing her any compassion. So not only does she have to deal with the physical scars, she's got all the mental scars from what actually happened to her. But then I'm sure, in that rough neighborhood, these kids are just, not being kind. And I think that just sets this course for her to just destroy the life that she should have had, she would have had if this never happened to her. So yeah. I think that's sad.
Yeah, it is sad. I think you can make, not to say that she couldn't have gone on to do, something bad on her own, but to say that this didn't play a factor, that would be nuts, right?
But yeah, I mean, it definitely stacked the deck against her.
Right. So let's get on to the next crime. So Coleman and Brown, they next turn up in Michigan. This is June 28th. They break into a couple's home, viciously attack them with a lead pipe. Although somehow both of them survive, Coleman and Brown steal their money and car. And this is another thing that you see, right? This is basically their MO throughout this whole 2-month spree is the rape, strangulation, breaking into people's houses, stealing their money, stealing their car to get to their next destination. You see that in almost every one of these. So at this point, they're headed to Ohio. In Ohio, they befriend a woman named Virginia Temple, who has several children, including a 9-year-old named Rochelle. Ultimately, all their bodies are discovered inside a crawl space in Temple's home. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said all. It's Virginia and Rochelle are discovered, and both were strangled. So now we get to July 11th, still in 1984. 15-year-old Tawny Story leaves her home in Cincinnati to attend a computer class at a junior high school. 8 days later, her bound and partially decomposed body will be discovered in an abandoned building. What's really interesting about this one is what is discovered underneath the body of Tawny Story, and it's a bracelet belonging to Virginia Temple. So, all of these things where you've got, they've got some of Alton's fingerprints, they're putting some of these things together. Obviously the guy is not a master criminal. He's not trying to, at least in my opinion, I don't know what you think, Mike, but it doesn't seem like he's trying to really be that, not to leave any clues or,
mentally, I mean, he's just all over the place, right? So, he does the terrible crime with Virginia Temple, right? And then, he leaves that scene, and somehow, later that day, they arrive at Dayton, and they visit the home of the Reverend Millard Gay and his wife Catherine. And they, this is our hometown, Mike. It's kind of scary, but they stay with Mr. and Mrs. Gay for, was it 2 days, Mike? Because I know they went to the religious service with them on July 9th, and then the next day, that's when Mr. Gay dropped off Coleman and Brown in downtown Cincinnati, which put them in the area on July 12th when they, eventually ran into Tony. Is it Tawny or Tony? Tony Story?
I don't know. I'm not sure. It's spelled strangely, so.
Right.
But I'm glad you said that, because in the beginning I say the reason why we picked this is because it has ties to Dayton, Ohio. Now they come back to Dayton later, and we'll talk about that. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I had left that out.
It just intrigues me that here they're so violent, and then they get to this reverend's house. They don't show any violent behavior towards him or his wife, and they're staying with them for a couple of days. It just makes you wonder, why. Again, you're in the mind of a killer. Why wasn't his buttons pushed that day? So,
well, because at this point, now they could have met other people, right, that we didn't read about, but they've killed basically everybody that they've come into contact with.
Absolutely.
And so they stay 2 days with these people in Dayton, Ohio, and they don't harm them at all. And actually, like you said, actually go to service with them.
Yeah.
And then it's how many days later that they kill Tawny?
it's like 3 days later.
And then, the couple in Dayton's going to come back into the story here, towards the end. But
my wife and I do a lot of shopping online, and we always use Rakuten. Rakuten is the smartest way to save money when you shop because you earn cash back at over 3,500 stores. We're talking fashion, beauty, electronics, home essentials, travel, dining, concert tickets, and more. Your favorite stores like Macy's, Nike, Sephora, Dyson, and Lowe's. And that's just to name a few. Pay Rakuten to send them shoppers. And Rakuten then passes on a part of that payment to its members as cashback. Cashback is deposited directly into your PayPal account, or Rakuten can send you a check. You can even maximize your savings by stacking cash back on top of other deals, like store sales and coupons. You're already shopping at your favorite stores. Why not save while you're doing it? It really is a no-brainer. Membership is free, and it's easy to sign up. Get the Rakuten app now and join the 17 million members who are already saving. Cashback rates change daily. See Rakuten.com for details. That's Rakuten. Your cash back really adds up. Hey folks, see if you've ever had this problem. You're trying to eat a little healthier, but you're in the grocery store aisle, you're looking at packaging, nutrition labels, and they're so confusing, you don't know what's good for you and what's not. Well, this is why I love Thrive Market, my go-to online grocery store for getting all of my healthy essentials delivered, and I don't even have to leave my couch. Finding better options for the whole family is easy with Thrive Market's Healthy Swap Scanner. Just scan a product, and it instantly recommends healthier swaps. This is how my wife and I found our new favorite snack, IQ bars. Sometimes I eat one in the morning with my coffee, sometimes just later on in between meals. They also have so many on-site filters that make it simple to shop by the needs of everyone in the family. Maybe you have someone who needs gluten-free food, somebody that has a peanut allergy. Well, no more scouring ingredient labels when you can just filter it all on Thrive Market. My wife and I often use the high protein filter to stock up on things like Sieti chips. Ready to make the switch? Go to thrivemarket.com/TCAT for 30% off your first order, plus a free $60 gift. That's THRIVE market.com/TCATT. thrivemarket.com/TCAT.
now we're on to July 13th. Like you said, Coleman and Brown were driven to Cincinnati. So they're in Cincinnati. They're in the town of Norwood. They enter the home of Harry and Marlene Walters under the premise that they want to purchase a camper that I guess the Walters were trying to sell. They kill Marlene and they hit Harry with a wooden candlestick, but Harry survives, and he later testifies at trial, and this is what he testifies to. That Coleman and Brown inquired about the camping trailer. Upon inviting Coleman and Brown into his home, he sat on the couch discussing the trailer with them. Coleman picks up a wooden candlestick, looks at it, admires it, hits Harry on the back of the head, knocking him unconscious. So obviously that's all Harry really knew at that point. But when it happened, a few hours later, Sherry Walters, who which is their daughter, comes home from work, and at the bottom of the basement steps, she finds her father Harry, clinging to life. Her mother is dead. Both of them have ligatures around their throats and electrical cords tied around their feet. Her mother's hands were bound behind her back, and her father's hands were handcuffed behind his back. Her mother's head is covered with a bloody sheet. So she comes home from work, and this is what she finds. They were trying to kill them both. They just didn't kill Harry.
And it's so, Mike, I hear that, and it just, you wonder, why did they cover her face? Was that Debra? Because she couldn't handle seeing somebody. Because from what I understand, he bludgeoned her head like up to 25 times with like a pair of locking pliers, And,
it had to be them, right? It couldn't be Harry because he's unconscious,
right? So,
but
and then the other part of that story is I find weird is that they say parts of her skull and brain were missing. Where'd they go?
Was that because they hit her so many times that
They
parts
couldn't
of
find it at the crime scene?
yeah, they couldn't find it? I really don't know. But, you know, to me, that would be, I guess I see what you're saying, where Deborah would cover her because she feels bad. But then we go back to some of the earlier stories, and she didn't feel bad enough to stop the rape and murder of a 7-year-old girl and actually participated. So I don't know. It could have been, but
Right.
it would seem strange that she would all of a sudden, grow a conscience and be not upset, but feel bad about this one, bad enough to feel like she had to cover this woman's head. I don't know. Strange.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was definitely brutal. I mean, besides the locking pliers and the candlestick and the soda bottle that they broke over the head and the magazine rack that they mentioned that was bloodstained in the living room. So, I mean, I could not even imagine what went down that day in that house that this husband had to watch. I'm sure he probably watched some of this or heard the screams. And couldn't do anything about it. And for just an innocent woman to be lunging like that.
Bad wiring, man.
Yeah, I mean, he just kept on going and didn't think about stopping. It's just sickening. But
yeah, well, I've got a sound bite from the Cincinnati News. I'm gonna play.
Inside the home, officials from the Hamilton County Coroner's Office began looking for what they call trace evidence: fingerprints, footprints, things that might be missing from the home. Anything that might connect suspect Alton Coleman to the brutal murder of Marlene Walters and the attack on her husband, Harry. Here at the Norwood Police Department, detectives met with FBI officials who came into Cincinnati just last night. It didn't take them long to determine that Alton Coleman might be the man they were looking for. As a matter of fact, he was their only suspect. What they do say is that Coleman is a survivor, a man who uses people to get what he wants.
He has a way of getting next to people. He can talk his way into the home. He meets people on the street and can discuss religion. He can discuss politics. He's very forward, very well-spoken, very calm, and very deadly.
Authorities believe what Coleman wanted and needed was a getaway car. Perhaps it wasn't a coincidence when police arrived at the scene of the murder yesterday. The victim's car was gone, stolen. At this time, police have no idea whether Coleman is still in the area or if he's left town. But a nationwide bulletin has been put out on the vehicle he's believed to be driving.
So at this point, the news is saying they know it's Coleman. They're basically said that the detectives are saying that Coleman's their only suspect. He's now the subject of a nationwide manhunt. So from here, Coleman and Brown go to Kentucky. And Cincinnati is right across the river from Kentucky, so not very far to go. But they kidnap a college professor, steal his car, lock him in the trunk, and they drive back to Dayton, Ohio, and they abandon the vehicle. But they leave this guy alive. They don't kill him.
which again just shows you how unstable mentally they are, right? Because prior to that, they just beat to death, a husband and the wife and almost the husband for basically the same thing. They just wanted their vehicle and some money and jewelry, and they fled. But for whatever reason, this guy, they just want his car, but they keep him alive, throw him in the trunk, and decide just leave him in the trunk for somebody to find him alive.
Yeah, no,
there's no rhyme or reason.
Right. I think it's a good question. Why kill Marlene? They didn't kill Harry. Did they think Coleman think he had killed Harry, or did he just didn't care whether he killed him or not? Because obviously they don't kill this Carmichael guy. Then it comes back to, like what you said, their only goal in both of those is to maybe get a little money and get a car to get where they want to go. So these are very different from the sexual crimes that we talked about earlier with the young girls. So from here, Coleman and Brown, like I said, they drive back to Dayton, Ohio. They encounter who, Mike? Who do they encounter?
Yeah, they go back to the same Reverend. They go back to Reverend and Mrs. Gay back in Dayton, and he recognizes that this is the subject of a huge nationwide manhunt.
Right, because like we talked about in the very beginning, this was #1 lead story, probably on all 3 stations. So no doubt Gay, who had met Coleman, a week ago, or I don't know how many days we are now. I'm sure as soon as he saw the news, he knew that he had kept the serial killer pair in his home. So when he meets him again, he definitely knows. But again, they don't kill him. They don't even harm him.
And actually, the Reverend actually says to Coleman, he says something like, "Why you want to do us like this?" And according to Reverend Gay, Coleman responds, "I'm not going to kill you, but we generally kill, then we go." So they typically kill where they go, but this time they're not going to kill you. He's telling them that. Coleman and Brown, at that point, they took their car and they headed back to Evanston, Illinois.
Yep. So they got, again, still their car. But it was this day that Coleman was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list, which is a big deal, right? Still is today. You make the FBI's 10 most wanted list, you're a bad seed, for sure. So you said it. They drive to Evanston, Illinois, in the the Reverend's stolen car, but on their way, for some reason, it's not made clear why in the reading that in the research that I did, but they make a detour to Indianapolis, and they kill a 75-year-old by the name of Eugene Scott, and they steal his car and dump the vehicle. Dump the Reverend's vehicle. And logically, that's probably the reason why. Again, they're on every news station. They definitely would have been on in Indiana as well, Illinois,
Yeah.
all the adjoining states.
From Dayton to Indianapolis, 120 miles.
Yeah, 2 hours?
So, yeah, 2
tops.
hours. Back in that day, yeah, I mean, without trying to grab the attention of police by speeding, it probably took him 2 hours. So I guess that's, he felt that was his best time to dump that car, because I'm sure he realized the Reverend, as soon as he left, made that call to the state police. So that makes sense why they did that. Again, but here's another thing where this time they kill a 75-year-old guy over a car. Before that, they left the Reverend and his wife alone. So it just goes to show you that again, how unstable he was and is, and why he is a serial killer.
Yeah, no doubt. So they do finally make it to Evanston. I guess this is where we get to the part where they're arrested, because they are arrested in Evanston. But the part that I thought was strange, it was someone from Coleman's old neighborhood in Waukegan that spotted them, drove to a gas station and notified the police. I didn't look to see, and I don't know where Evanston is in relation to Waukegan. I don't know how far apart they are.
Yeah, and I don't know either, Mike. But it's interesting. I don't think it's that far, for the fact that somebody in his own neighborhood happened to be, in that same town, that could recognize him at a red light and have the whereabouts to pull over and call the police department and alert them to this.
Yeah, it wasn't strange to me that somebody recognized him, because we talked about he's on the news, but I just thought I did think it was strange that it was somebody from his old neighborhood when he wasn't back in his old neighborhood, I guess, is the part I thought was a little strange. But like I said, this guy drives to a gas station, notifies the police. They put out a APB. That's my police lingo for you. They find him in a park. They approach Coleman, and the detectives see Brown walking away. They question Coleman. He's got no identification. It actually said that he denied he was Alton Coleman. I think they knew who he was. And while this interview's taking place, 2 other officers stopped Brown as she tried to get out of the park that they were in. When they search her, they find a gun in her purse. What I thought was so they're both taken into custody. They didn't put up a fight, and they take them to the police department. And they did identify both of them by fingerprints. So obviously they know they have them at this point. But the part that I thought was I don't know. I guess I got a little chuckle about it. So they strip search Coleman at the Evanston police station. They find a steak knife in his socks. Which, when I read that, I chuckled a little bit because I thought, it seems like if they knew this guy was Alton Coleman, that they would have really, made sure before they even got him in the car that he wasn't carrying any weapons, but maybe not. I'm not a police officer, so I don't know the.
Yeah, I think I would have done that, right? I would at least, have him take his shoes off and take off his 2 pair of socks on each foot that he had on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it said. It was the knife was in between the 2 pairs of socks that he was wearing.
I mean, it's July in Illinois. It's hot. Why would someone have 2 pair of socks on? That should have been like a red flag to me, but I'm not a cop, so.
Yeah, me neither. So they're arrested. They've got 6 states basically involved in trying to figure out how they're going to prosecute Coleman and Brown, because they'd committed crimes, murder, rape, all different types of crimes within these 6 states. Michigan's ruled out because they didn't have the death penalty. Eventually, they decide on Ohio, because Ohio does have the death penalty, that was their best shot, was to try them in Ohio. And from here, it's pretty routine. They're tried, they're convicted, but they're only convicted of the rape and murder of Tawny Story in Cincinnati and Marlene Walters in Norwood. But they're not convicted, and I'm not sure, maybe you read and maybe but they were not convicted for the murder of Virginia Temple and Rochelle Temple, those 2 that were found in their crawl space of their home. They lived in Toledo, which is obviously in Ohio. I didn't know, Mike, if you read anything about why that was not part of the indictment.
And I didn't, Mike, and I can only, speculate that they didn't have the solid evidence that they needed to tie them to that, so they didn't want to cloud the case with that when they had a solid case with, the Cincinnati murder and also the Norwood murder.
Yeah, that does make sense. I mean, ultimately it was a good strategy because they were, both Coleman and Brown were sentenced to death. That would have been, 85? So that the appeals process begins, which, as we know, can take a very long time. Coleman's case ultimately goes to the U.S. Supreme Court more than once between 85 and 2002. I think his argument was that the death sentence was unconstitutional, but I think that fell on deaf ears.
It's interesting. Did you get to see what he had for his last meal?
I did. I saw that. Actually, it sounded pretty good. Filet mignon with mushroom gravy, biscuits and gravy, fried chicken, French fries, broccoli with cheese. I'd strike that. Collard greens. I'd strike that. Not into that. Onion rings, cornbread, a salad, sweet potato pie, butter pecan ice cream, and cherry cola.
Yeah,
I'm in. I'm in. Take out the broccoli with cheese and the collard greens, and I'm in.
Yeah, I just thought, filet mignon.
They convicted him in Ohio. Both of them, Coleman and Brown, they both got the death penalty. Coleman had 2 death penalty sentences in Ohio, which is strange. I don't know how you can kill somebody more than once, but I guess in case one gets thrown out, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's why. So he had what, two in Ohio, and he had a couple others in the neighboring states.
Yeah, Illinois, Indiana, and Brown had hers in Ohio, and then also one in Indiana. In 91, though, Brown's death sentence is commuted to life in prison by the governor of Ohio just before he leaves office. And even though she did receive that other death penalty sentence in Indiana, she's currently serving her prison sentence in Ohio, and Indiana has not done anything about pursuing her execution. So I don't know. I assume they have the ability, possibly, if they wanted to try to bring her to Indiana and put her on death row if they wanted to.
I would think there's a possibility there, but I'm guessing that this point, the Attorney General over there it's not of interest to him at this point. Maybe he feels comfortable with the fact that she's got life in prison with no possibility of parole ever, so she'll die, in prison.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing that was telling that I read about Brown is it said that she continues to show a complete lack of remorse for her crimes. Going back to your theory, I'm not sure she put that sheet over Marlene's face out of anything other than maybe the fact that she didn't want to see that.
Yeah, that, or again, go back to the very beginning. Her mental capacity of, instead of a 21-year-old, more like a 12-year-old. So sometimes 12-year-olds, they don't know when I don't want to say they don't know, but they don't understand what they've done wrong.
Well, it would be nice. It would be nice to know what her IQ was and what that correlates to in years. Like you're saying, 12. Is it 12? Is it 14? Is it? Yeah. It would be nice to know that. I never saw or read what that was, but it'd be interesting. So I do want to play one final clip about Alton Coleman's execution.
Execution. He is continuing to be very calm and very compliant, cooperating in every way, not creating any problems whatsoever over at the death house.
Coleman spent his last hours visiting with spiritual advisors and his attorneys until the 8:45 cutoff time.
At which time he will be offered a shower, and then we will prepare him for the execution process.
The execution process began just before 10. A doctor gave Coleman a shot to sedate him, a second shot to slow his heart rate. He was then transferred from a holding cell 17 steps to the death chamber.
Mr. Coleman came in wearing a non-denominational, we're told, prayer shawl.
When he walked in, he seemed quite confident. It happened quite fast. And he seemed to kind of adjust his shawl and then did not need any kind of escorting onto the gurney.
Coleman made a last statement, but he didn't use his own words. Instead, he quoted the 23rd Psalms.
He repeated, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and continued with that.
And then it seemed like his chest heaved. He took a couple quick breaths, probably about 8 or 9. And then that's kind of when he just stopped. It was no big last breath.
The execution process for inmate Alton Coleman has been completed. The official time of death, 10:13.
So, Gibby, that's it. That's the story of Alton Coleman and Debra Brown.
There was a retired FBI agent named John Douglas, and he was FBI profiler. And he threw an interesting fact out there that he said that, part of these crimes were slightly racially motivated. And he cites evidence that Coleman, in the middle of a vicious sexual assault, he would go into practically an incoherent tirade about how blacks were forcing him to rape or murder other blacks. And then Coleman and Brown had also left a racist slogan with lipstick at the scene of the rape or murder of Tawny Story, which that was their only non-African American victim. So it is just an interesting, fact, back at that time from where Alton grew up, and as you mentioned, how he selected his victims back then. So I just wanted to add that.
No, I'm glad you did, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Mike, for coming on, being a guest host for our first episode. It was a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I enjoyed it, Mike. Anytime.
All right. Well, listen, I'd like to thank everyone for downloading and listening to the podcast. Your support means everything. Please visit our website at www.truecrimeallthetime.com. There you can see all of our contact information in order to follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Click on the donate button for a number of ways to support the show through PayPal, Flatter, or Patreon. One thing I would definitely ask is that you bookmark our page and click on the Amazon banner anytime that you're doing your Amazon shopping. This is a great way to support the show and help defray some of the production costs, and it does not cost you a dime. Another great way to support the show is to tell your friends through social media, word of mouth. That's what's really going to help us grow. So look for our next episode, and as always, stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
Inspired by the hit Wondery podcast Against the Odds comes the gripping guidebook, How to Survive Against the Odds, Tales and Tips for Animal Attacks and Natural Disasters. This might just be the most important book you'll ever read. Go inside life or death situations where everyday people survived nature's most extreme scenarios, and learn how you can too. In these tales, you'll hear about the grit, willpower, and know-how needed to endure shipwrecks, alligator attacks, earthquakes, and more. You'll learn from experts, including top doctors, about what happens to your body and mind in life-threatening situations. Plus, important tips on what to do, and equally important, what not to do when faced with a situation that is truly against the odds. Go to survivalguidebook.com to pre-order How to Survive Against the Odds today and get the perfect gift in time for graduation and Father's Day.